This is episode 542 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, it's another episode of Where in the World is Paul? And as you can tell, I am not side by side with Wally in the studio. Currently, I am in Savannah, Georgia, having just traveled there on Monday to attend a event for coalition leaders put on by the Americans for Tax Reform, Grover Norquist. I'll be meeting with people who are leaders in all of their respective states across the country who host what are called center-right meetings. I've talked about the idea of the Leave Us Alone coalition, people who, broadly speaking, on the right don't want to infringe others' rights, but don't want their rights infringed. And it's trying to build those coalitions where applicable for further policy and, quite frankly, economic and societal success down the road. So good to be with you, though, Wally.
Yeah, Paul, great to be with you. And so, we'll talk about, I've seen the list of topics for the podcast today, but I'd be interested to hear how, the folks there might view some of the things that are going on that aren't necessarily always taxation oriented, but they're certainly regulatory oriented, like electric vehicle mandates and the like. So if you get a chance, I'd love to hear your thoughts on those, Paul, from the perspective of the conference you're attending.
Yeah, well, being that we're at this particular juncture and what's been going on here in there in New Mexico, I'm sure I will be informing a lot of folks about the governor and her anti-gun efforts. But before we go into that and update listeners on that, maybe we can talk a little bit next week about the reaction people have among this national group. I want to discuss our education conference, which took place on Friday last week. It was held at St. Pius X High School on Albuquerque's west side. It was free and open to folks across the state. We do have video of what I would call large swaths of the conference. We didn't have the capability to do every single session, but we tried to highlight some of the more significant sessions, and those will be released on video here in the not too distant future. About 100 folks from out of state and in state participated in that conference. I think it was very informative. I had a lot of great comments from people, both folks coming in and talking, as well as folks in New Mexico learning and absorbing the information. And, we're obviously at a point where New Mexico does have charter schools. We have a long way to go before other forms of choice, private school choice, ESAs become law, but we also have, Mississippi and their reforms within the system. But of course, as we've talked about, after Martinez pushed a lot of those reforms, she was denied anything in law, merely got it through the regulatory process, and then immediately when MLG took over, those reforms, to the extent that any of them had taken effect, were immediately pushed back. But we had a lot of great people, and nobody is assuming that we're going to be like North Carolina soon, which I'm told became the 10th state in the country to adopt a universal education savings account model here just this past week. But New Mexico is obviously a state in great need of significant education reform, and hopefully we'll continue those conversations forward.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. And, it's one of those things. I know you have been talking about this. Many have been raising this issue of educational attainment in New Mexico and what can be done. And, I think not that they were trying to beat you to the punch, but there was a pretty strong editorial in the Albuquerque Journal where they're just pointing out, many of the same things that the Rio Grande Foundation has been talking about with regards to, what do we need to do to make our education system better? We're in last place, and a lot of people, it doesn't seem to be bothering, but maybe more and more are getting the message and asking the tough questions about what really needs to be done to make it better.
Well, obviously, the unions were called out in that editorial, and that was a good editorial, specifically focused primarily on Albuquerque public schools. Of course, school board elections are here in, gosh, just about a month and a half. City council elections, and of course it varies across the state, but in Albuquerque, APS and the city council are up because they went with a state law that put them in a kind of a unified calendar. Some other areas of the state, more likely more conservative areas, have stuck with the March election calendar, but clearly APS is the flagship. It's the largest school district by far in the state, and there's some very important races there. Peggy Muller-Aragon being a leader of the reform-minded education group on the school board. There's a lot of critical issues to be discussed and critical races here in this November's election. They haven't gotten nearly the publicity that the presidential race and governor's races and other statewide races tend to get, but definitely folks pay attention to those, and please, when the time comes, I urge everybody to go out and vote in those races, and make sure you know what you're voting on as well, because going up and pulling the trigger doesn't do much good. You got to know what the issues are, and the unions are coming for reformers. They have gotten used to dominating the entire education system. At this point in time, the unions really have control over the governor and the legislature, but they don't control as well the school board itself. And it would be a shame to allow the local APS school board to lapse into essentially what amounts to total union domination. So important races there. Anything to add to that, Wally?
Just the fact that school board elections are important no matter where you live in New Mexico, but just the math of it, Albuquerque Public Schools being the largest district in the state, you couldn't, it would be all but mathematically impossible to make good improvement in education unless it happens in Albuquerque Public Schools, just because of the sheer size of it. So it's not to say that education reform and improving things around the state's not important, but it's absolutely critical in Albuquerque.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that education alone would have made a difference in these three people's lives, but it was heartening, I think, to a lot of folks in Albuquerque, especially, that the killers, the people who shot the family car outside of Isotopes Park, that precipitated the governor's gun public health order that essentially banned gun carrying in Bernalillo County. There are three youngish men, young boys, if you will, even. They were captured. And, there's never a good reason to shoot up somebody's car, but the idea that it was a what appears to be case of mistaken identity is all the more tragic. Of course, as I hypothesized when we still didn't know who these people were, they have track records in the criminal system. One of them was wanted for failing to appear in court in connection with the alleged drug dealing. Another one was in custody already because after the shooting, of course, because he was arrested in connection with having a gun and 100,000 fentanyl tablets, which I don't know, but from what I understand, that's a very, very large amount of fentanyl. Just tragic, of course, but not their capture, of course, but the shooting incident itself. But these young people are too young, never good to be engaged in this sort of behavior. But what does their lives look like, and what do their parents teaching them? These are all heavily tattooed, close to the face, upwards of the neck, which is always a warning sign in my book, generally speaking. Just very sad incidents, and I hope these people are brought to the fullest extent of the law in terms of justice, but it'll never make that family whole. And clearly, and there's been a lot of back and forth in the letters section in the Albuquerque Journal, surprising numbers of people who support the governor, considering especially some of the prominent anti-gun voices who still criticize the governor for being, unilateral and anti-constitutional. This incident, it just strikes me as highly unlikely that any gun order, any reduction in the legality of guns would have stopped any of these kinds of events. These were not law-abiding individuals. They were street thugs and criminals, and it's unfortunate that we have so many of those characters in our community, but these individuals deserve to spend a very, very long time behind bars, and I hope the justice system works to that effect.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. And when we didn't know who the perpetrators were in this heinous crime, there was a lot of speculation that actually turned out to be true, that these were not people who had gone through a concealed carry class or had firearms acquired for use for appropriate purposes, and the fact that one of the suspects had 100,000 fentanyl pills, which, think about that. That's a pretty staggering number, really, when you think about it. Guns, the whole gun debate, I know it's very emotional. A lot of people act like if you just get rid of guns, everything's going to be okay. As you point out, the criminals tend to not follow those laws. And if you look at places like Mexico, some of the country of Mexico, some of the most stringent gun laws in the world, does that make them gun free and make them a peaceful society? Far from it. Chicago, New York, there are a lot of places where if it were only as easy as saying let's outlaw guns and everything is going to be okay, if that would be an effective thing, that would be wonderful. But alas, I just don't believe it is, and I just think that debate really does cloud the real debate about why were these people on the street? They'd done a lot of crimes, and that seems to be a ongoing theme, is that the people that are committing the worst of these crimes, this is not their first interaction with the law enforcement system, but that's not that hard to catch them, but it's surely hard to keep them. They certainly like to turn them away, at least in New Mexico in recent years.
Yeah. Surely their sentencing and trial and whatever that comes next will be closely followed, given the high profile nature of this incident. Now, speaking of judges and recent judicial decisions, in one that I think you'll agree, Wally, is a bit of a head scratcher, a New Mexico State District Judge named Joshua Allison, he was appointed by Lujan Grisham back in 2019. He, in a case taken up by the ACLU, determined that the city of Albuquerque cannot clear so-called homeless encampments out of public spaces. The actual decision or the case sprang out of the clearing of Coronado Park, which I spent more time around Coronado Park because it was on my commute to work every day, and so we watched the evolution and ebb and flow of that park as it was right by the interstate as I drove by it on my way to downtown Albuquerque every day. But the encampment had become a serious drug area. It was the site of 5 homicides, numerous assaults, and a lot of calls for police resources. And before I hand it over to you, Wally, it just strikes me as amazing that the ACLU would think that this is something that should be allowed to continue, that this kind of public camping, and not just continue at Coronado Park apparently, but they seem to be of the view, as expressed in their lawsuit, that this is something that should continue. Now, they claim, and we had Judge Glock on the program back over the summer, back in July or something like that, and he said that there were a lot of spaces available in terms of homeless facilities. The ACLU lawsuit says that they were not available, and that the ones that were in bad shape. And then there's been issues with the Gateway Center. This is beyond the scope of my work at the Rio Grande Foundation and my knowledge base, but it strikes me as a very, very big leap in the judicial sense that if somebody is to be cleared out of a public space like Coronado Park, somehow that is incumbent on the citizens of Albuquerque to provide them shelter, that should be connected. I find that to be lacking in logic. Perhaps there are legal precedents upon which it is based, which are ultimately just as illogical and fallacious. So hopefully, Mayor Keller made the right decision, in my estimation, of removing them from Coronado Park. We've obviously continued to have a problem, which may never go away, even if we had somebody in the mayor's office who was doing everything that I wanted. But boy, this decision just really screams judicial overreach.
Yes, Paul, and as again on that Judge Glock interview, and there's more and more people that are coming around this way of thinking and looking at the issue this way, is that, are you really doing the people who are the tent dwellers, quote unquote homeless? No, they don't have a home, but most of them don't want one either. They tend to be the mentally ill, and a lot of them are drug addicts that want to do meth or fentanyl or whatever their drug of choice is, and being in a tent is an ideal situation for that. So are we just now in the business, as the ACLU, in the business of basically drug addiction enablement, because that really is what a lot of these policies boil down to. And there are a lot of shelters in Albuquerque. As you say, there's a little bit of disagreement on, are there always enough available at any given point? But there are a lot of them available. And to just say that, yes, anyone can go pitch a tent on any public space and there's no problem with that. Well, it's interesting. You don't necessarily always get what you want. You get what you incentivize. And if that were the case, I would be highly incentivized to take away public spaces in Albuquerque. Let's get rid of parks. Who needs them? Because if they're just going to be drug abuse centers with tents on them, why would we want a park like that in New Mexico? Sell off the land, develop it for homes, or do something else with it. So yeah, and this is not the first time. A lot of times the ACLU takes what to me are counterintuitive positions with regard to how they interpret the law and what their best path forward is. And this certainly is one of those, with a judge here in New Mexico to support them.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that Mayor Keller has the level of creativity necessary to overcome the ACLU. This will be hashed out in court one way or the other. My hope is that other courts, so obviously we're in the state system, so these are de facto generally going to be liberal judges. There's a few at the appeals level who are conservative, but once you get back to the state Supreme Court, you get another group of fairly liberal judges. I don't know the route exactly this will take, but and I can't imagine the U.S. Supreme Court wishing to dive into this whole situation. Maybe down the road, but yeah, it is frustrating. It is something that is, I think, lacking in innovation in this area. You know, what I would do is probably I would lease the parks out to private managements. I would do that anyway, just as a general policy idea, because the management of those parks could be done by a private organization at a much lower cost. John Stossel, famously, at least in my mind, did a excellent series on Central Park and in New York City, and how that was really managed by a private group that has been able to upkeep that park in much better ways than other parks were being done. Now, I don't know if that's changed after COVID and with New York having moved way to the left, but the fact remains that a private contractor could engage in a variety of practices that would maybe not necessarily be available to the city, or might be seen as beyond the pale for the city, that they could probably do as a private organization. But boy, it is frustrating, and I hope this problem does not explode into an even worse situation than it was before at Coronado Park, as this winds its way through the justice system. So
yeah, and then just a real quick point too, public spaces include more than just outdoor parks. There have been a lot of stories over the years, even before COVID, of people squatting at airports, and city council chambers, that's a public space. The hallways at City Hall and the county, the county offices. So there's much there. If you can't regulate your activities on public spaces for people setting up tents, there's already been a lot of examples around the country and around the world about people going inside to airports and places similar.
Yeah, we'll cross.
I don't want to give anyone any ideas, but
hopefully they're not listening to this particular show, getting those ideas. Yeah, but they do tend to. The creativity of the homeless cannot be understated. They do some creative things, even in their often addled state that they're in. You'd be surprised how you drive by some of these encampments, and it's impressive. You just wish their ingenuity would be put into a more lucrative path. And I suspect that issue, before we leave that topic, one of the questions I have for the ACLU and this judge is, are there really not enough spaces available for the homeless, or are there not enough spaces that allow the behavior, the activity that the homeless wish to engage in that are available? Because I know the tiny home villages was one particular entity that was set up that remained largely vacant for a long period of time, because they require that you be clean of drugs and maybe alcohol as well. It strikes me that I would be willing to bet, just like these guys that shot up the van having track records, I will bet that there are drug and alcohol free homeless shelters and places available, but somehow those are apparently not acceptable, and that fact is acceptable to this judge in the ACLU. So, if you are going to mandate that a government provide some form of shelter to get somebody out of a park, you would think that they could provide the shelter on the legal platform of not allowing illegal drug use to go on. But what do I know? This is just logic, Wally.
No, and Paul, but it really does bring home the whole argument is, do we really have a homelessness issue in the people that we're seeing on the streets? And overall, it appears that less and less that this is a homeless problem. It's not about homelessness. It's about drug abuse and alcohol abuse and mental illness. And all the homes in the world aren't necessarily going to solve that. And you're right. The tiny home village, which is pretty vacant when I drive by it, Paul, and there's a lot of tents set out within a couple blocks of it, in the ultimate irony.
Well, moving on, if we had the budget for this particular show, I might create a regular segment like Ben Shapiro does, things he likes, things he hates, and he has a little deal on screen there. Well, we've got electric vehicles here at the tipping point, New Mexico, because obviously there's going to be some big decisions made by the governor's unelected Environmental Improvement Board here in mid-November on electric vehicles, but there's pretty much news coming out every single week regarding EVs or some policy relating to them. Now, this one I've been kind of holding on to because our friend Todd Myers, who was on a show a while back, he's essentially a free market environmentalist working for the Washington Policy Center up in Washington. And at a recent event that I attended with him, I asked him, how are they going to enforce these electric vehicle regulations if the governor gets her way? And Todd had heard, because Washington's another liberal state moving down this path, he got back to me, and here is his answer. So I'll just basically read from an email that he wrote to me about how the EV mandates will be enforced in Washington State or New Mexico. And he says, when dealers sell EVs, they generate credits. Those credits count toward their sales targets. Dealers who have more credits can sell them to those who need them. It's another cap and trade system. But for dealers who cannot make up the difference, they pay a penalty of 4 times the value of the EV credit. The law, as we've talked about, applies to dealers, not to vehicle registrations. So as it stands now, if a New Mexican wishes to go to El Paso or Amarillo or Lubbock, for just to name a few, or they could go over to Phoenix, at least as it stands now, they could buy a gas-powered vehicle and come back and register it. This is a dealer-oriented regulation at this point in time. So that's the deal with how it'll be regulated. It's basically a cap and trade. So if you're a Tesla dealership, you have all these credits you build up, you get to sell them to the folks trying to sell Chevy trucks or Ford F-150s that are not electric.
Yes, Paul, and this EV issue is the gift that keeps on giving. We will see. That's a very good question. There's a lot of issues with them in general. Places like California, a lot of people who buy them are selling them because they don't like them. And as we've talked many times, if you just use it to drive back and forth to work and you happen to be in a situation where you can charge it either at your place of employment or in your garage or at your home, they're probably pretty good. For everybody else, they are a pretty tough pretty tough thing. And then, you know, car prices overall have really gone up, and electric vehicles are right there with that. And so most families can't afford a car that just has a single purpose, which is commuting around town. And if they have one or maybe two, the EVs aren't the way to go. But the price to the typical family and the cost and all of that's not necessarily part of what the Environmental Improvement Board may be looking at from the sounds of it.
Yeah, and we're not necessarily going to get into it, but we've talked a little bit about the film strike, which appears to be resolved or on the verge of being resolved. Of course, UAW and the automakers are involved in a strike of their own. That'll have a much greater impact on the economic situation of our country. And, unions tend to be very oriented towards Democrats and President Biden. So it's interesting that they are striking. It's early enough that as long as the strike ends in 3 months or 4 months, or it could be next week, the auto strike won't likely impact Biden's political chances. If it drags on, that would have real impacts. But the SAG and the film strikers expressed concern about artificial intelligence and its potential impact on them and their jobs. I've got to think that electric vehicles are hovering in the background here on this UAW strike, while they are probably unwilling to mention that kind of thing publicly because it is a core Joe Biden Democrat Party issue seemingly these days. It does strike me as something that the way EVs are made is not at all the same as the way traditional gas-powered vehicles are made. And there are real concerns among those unions that they could see massive job losses, either as those components and more of them are made overseas, or they just don't require the amount of labor as a traditional gas-powered vehicle. So interesting to watch that as it plays itself out.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. And even in some of the things that are very labor intensive in electric vehicles, the batteries are not something that the enrichment of the lithium is likely to be done in the United States. It's going to be done other places in all probability. So that's another issue. And you're right. I've seen a lot of EV involvement talk in places like Forbes and Newsweek, although there are many who are denying that it has any impact, but I have a feeling that that's may not absolutely be the case with regard to that strike.
Yeah. Well, speaking of politicians and so-called green policies, our old friend Deb Haaland, Secretary of the Interior, former Congresswoman from New Mexico, of course, somebody who is involved in New Mexico politics for a long time. The Washington Times had a report tying Deb Haaland's daughter, who goes by Soma Toya. You can find this over at Heirs of Enchantment, including a link to the Times article. Apparently has close ties to a government-sponsored, Cuban government-sponsored, that is, group called the Venceremos Brigade. This is one that is a bit of a rabbit hole we could dive into if we had unlimited time, but there's been very well justified reports of Russia and China, governmental interests, if you will, pushing and helping fund environmental groups working in the United States that, the stated objective is to put traditional oil and gas, traditional mining out of commission and to not allow that kind of thing to happen anymore. And of course, Haaland is Secretary of Interior. Her daughter is, the old phrase, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. The difference is that her daughter can do whatever she wants. But this is a radical group that, according to the FBI, is engaged in recruitment of individuals who are politically oriented, who someday may obtain a position, elective or appointive, in the U.S. government, and provide the Cuban government with access to political, economic, and military intelligence. So it's almost as if the Secretary of Interior's daughter is working on behalf of the Cuban government, which is not good, and in ways on issues that are undermining American energy security and our ability to mine and drill for materials that will make America prosperous and independent of some of these kind of questionable governments across the globe. And just very, very questionable relationships here. And of course, Biden has brought this all upon himself, but he's ultimately bringing this upon us here as Americans through the form of energy costs and putting wide tracts of land off limits to mining and drilling.
Yeah, Paul, and it is tough to overstate the importance of energy in a modern society, much less a free society. And without energy, everything can come crashing down very, very quickly. And so I think that's why these issues are so important. And you know what? No matter what your feelings and beliefs are with regard to carbon dioxide and its role in the climate, to just turn off an energy source without another one available in the short term, it could be the equivalent of the disasters that normally you have to have, cataclysmic disasters or war to bring that upon. And again, I'm not trying to say that that's going to happen, but some of these policies, if they're carried to their illogical conclusion that many groups like this would like, it would be a sad state of affairs, no question. And again, just ask the Germans how things are going, having to rely on Mother Russia for their natural gas supplies.
I agree. All right. Finally, a opinion piece ran that I wrote across the state of New Mexico. It tied together 4 seemingly unrelated issues: the governor's COVID policies during that time period and her public emergency during the gun issue recently. So those 2 public emergencies, then her EV mandate attempt, and finally the taking of a bill that failed during the special session that would have provided free fares for the rail runner, limited those fares, reduced those fares, and instead just used money that was apparently lying around. These are 4 examples of our governor, Lujan Grisham, essentially ignoring democratic principles. And so I wrote a piece that, of course, based on the recent gun public health order, also cited several of her other areas in which she's expressed a clear disdain for democracy, disdain for even the legislature, the way other people and other entities, elected or unelected, feel about her policies, from COVID to guns to rail runner fees and fares, as well as electric vehicles. And you could, I'm sure anybody out there could find an additional 4 or 14 or 24 cases of the governor ignoring basic democratic tenets, but these are the 4 I used for my recent article that was run in media outlets across the state. So I encourage folks to check that out at heirsoфenchantment.com or riograndefoundation.org or in your local newspaper.
Yeah, and Paul, and as I read your piece, it struck me as that there have been plenty of governors who, if they wanted things to happen, given the composition of the legislature, a la Susana Martinez, would have had little or no opportunity to get her way through the legislative process. On things like this, the governor either doesn't try or tries once or doesn't try very hard or whatever, and then just says, well, I'm just going to do it myself when, any objective look. And again, not to give anyone ideas, but the legislature has been very pliable to her when she's done her homework and gotten with them ahead of time. But that doesn't seem to be her preferred route for policy in many of these cases, as you so rightly point out.
Yeah. I obviously am not in the legislature, but boy, even a Democrat who probably, say agrees with the governor 75% of the time, you would have to feel disrespected by her and her approach because she treats you like a mushroom. She leaves you in the dark and feeds you manure, to use the polite term for it. And I just find that you would think that these legislators, who some of them have to have principles and the wherewithal to just on the idea that we have separation of powers and that the legislature does make the laws of the state of New Mexico, including on crime issues, that would hold water. But it doesn't seem like I think if I had to criticize the founding fathers of this country, the idea that people of the same faction, different legislative bodies, or the executive, that they would stand up to each other in any way. It seems like the executive at the national level as well as at the state level tends to be able to essentially dictate to the legislators of their own party what they want. That's obviously very prevalent here in New Mexico among the ruling Democrats. Republicans nowadays tend to be the ones who, to quote the old Will Rogers line, I'm not part of any organized party, I'm a Democrat. Well, that seems to now apply to the Republicans, not the Democrats.
Yeah, and Paul, that your point is well taken. Legislatures have really constitutionally, they're given things like the power of the purse, and they have not maintained their power under separation of powers. That's the core of the U.S. and most state constitutions, and they've let the president or the governor run roughshod over many of those principles that are still there on the books, but aren't followed as nearly as much as they were originally, or probably should be today.
All right, Wally. Well, that's where we're going to leave things. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.